Hello and welcome back to another episode of Veritas Live. I'm your host, as usual, Anthony Cusimano. And unfortunately, just like today's topic, one of our guests is unable to be here today. Healthcare extraordinaire Rick Bryant has been waylaid, but that's not going to stop us in the spirit of how we continue forth and how we deal with any kind of threat, large or small. We're carrying on. And with us today is the amazing data protection extraordinaire, John Hank, who is a great friend of mine and who I consider to be an absolute expert in all things data protection, healthcare, and beyond. And now, before he starts to blow our mind with some truth bombs regarding the conversations today, as you know, we like to start every episode with an icebreaker, and I'd like to invite all of you to participate in the icebreaker today. So we just put out a press release titled, "New Research Shows Human Error, Embarrassment, and Ransomware Combine to Undermine the Benefits of Cloud Adoption." So I thought it'd be fun to have our icebreaker be today around what happens when you lose data. So John, you just lost data. You have no backup. How do you react?
Well, thanks, Anthony. Although, I think I have to take a little issue with you implying that I lose data, right? I'm really big on making data. I mean, everything from my home stuff to everything. I have multiple copies all over the place at my parents' house, wherever. But let's say this happens, right? Let's say you lose data, right? That's a big mess, right? This is why I don't want to lose data, right? If you lose data, this isn't stuff you can replace sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, there's a lot of things out there you're like, yeah, I think we probably know what it said, right? Or it's just a copy of something we did before, so we're going to do it again, right? But in some, especially some verticals, it's stuff that came from something that only happened at that point in time and you can't recreate it, right? So if you lose data, I mean, that's a big problem. And that's why I take it seriously. It's everything from, like I said, medical records to personal photos, right? And it's some things you can't recreate. So if you lose data, you might be lucky. You might be able to, rebuild that. You might not be able to. So that's the point, is you need to position yourself so you're not going to ever lose data. So you're going to be safe.
I'm gonna nerd out on you for a minute here, because I think my reaction is pretty typical of someone who didn't take care of their data. I remember a long time ago, back in high school, I was big into PC gaming, and my parents' computer caught a virus. I'm not going to take responsibility for that action, but I had 100-hour save in an Elder Scrolls game, and when it just vanished and disappeared from my life, I did that pace around the room, breathe thing. I'm not going to say I cried. You should never cry over a video game, but it certainly impacted my life in a way that I've never lost anything ever again. So tragic that it had to be.
I get that. And even like in the gaming thing, right?
Yeah.
You can, save copies elsewhere. That's something you should do, right?
Absolutely.
Right? This is something everyone should worry about in every aspect.
Absolutely agree. I'm curious to hear what our audience thinks. Be sure to send us your reactions. Is it pacing around the room breathing? Is it crying? Head and hands? We want to know. We want to hear from you. Now, with that, we're going to dive into our topic today. So, our episode's titled Lives on the Line, How Ransomware is Just Impacting Healthcare Writ Large. And we are seeing this just come true full force. So, John, first question, and this goes even beyond healthcare, is everyone's digitally transforming today. Digital transformation is not just a buzzword, it's a lifestyle. I'm digitally transforming right now. So why is it important for a healthcare organization to think about how they're digitally transforming, and what future events are going to start showing up on the horizon for them, for us, for everyone?
So you got to think, healthcare is one of the more interesting verticals out there right now. This idea that there is so much potential for leveraging data. I mean, we live in a data-driven world, but healthcare is where there's the real tangible futuristic value to society, right? It's one thing to be like, I can manage likes and stuff like that, or I can have followers, but the fact that this is technology that you can leverage and you move into these new platforms, it allows you to streamline and increase the amount of data analysis you can do. Healthcare companies can't sit there and have their own bespoke, custom-made infrastructure for all this stuff and do all these advanced technologies. So moving into these new structures, these platforms, it allows them to have access to capabilities that are going to be cost effective enough to scale up their capabilities, do the analysis, do these things, do these cross references, and really generate new innovations that are going to basically keep us healthy. And in the future, I mean, human health is going to be the big transformative thing, I think, going forward, is how well we can manage our health and those aspects.
So it's interesting you bring that up, John. Before we get into our next question, it actually sounds to me like you're suggesting that not only is digital transformation going to help them as far as their data protection and sort of ransomware resiliency goes, but it's going to help us as patients in healthcare as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you've seen that in the healthcare verticals already, as they've started to blanket out that you could have multiple, maybe related organizations. Maybe it's across a university or across a healthcare provider where they can come in and say, I've got solution XYZ, and it's going to help me in the sense that I've done this work here. I have this research. There's maybe a partner they have, and they can share the metadata about that. Maybe not customer data, but that or patient data, but that information. And so it's going to accelerate the collaboration a lot of these spaces, I think, and that's really what drives our success.
There's definitely a lot of positives that can come out of this, not just preventing the negative. And before we get into our next question, which I think deals a little bit more with those negative side of things, do you want to call out? We had Joel Boya from our audience said he felt bad for a couple of days after losing data. If it's only a couple of days, you're a stronger person than I felt bad for months after my incident. So let's get into a topic we actually started to sort of breach into last episode, which Karen Evans brought up, cyber acumen, which I'd never heard of before, but it's basically how we understand behavior in regards to cybersecurity. So we're finding cyber acumen as not as well practiced, and the behavior is not where it should be, especially in healthcare and amongst healthcare employees today. So what path forward as far as this sort of cyber behavior goes is going to give organizations the best chance of dealing with things like the threat of ransomware on the horizon?
Well, okay, so the cyber acumen is really a unique challenge when it comes to healthcare, because in a lot of businesses, right, you always have people have access to the data, and there's, that's your big concern. Like, I'm on a system that has access to the data, or I interface with it, and I'm gonna, in my case, right, I know the risks of ransomware, right? I know how to head these things off. I'm gonna pick up on it, right? Not everyone knows that, but a lot of companies are aware of it and stuff like that. But one of the big risks you in healthcare is the amount of people that are interfacing with input and around these ingress systems to these databases of health information is astounding, and it's across all sorts of different skill sets, right? So there's all sorts of people that are on here that maybe have different levels of understanding, right? So there's a whole risk level there of, are these people trained well enough? Do they understand what's what? Do they know where not to click, right? Those sort of things. And then there's the whole other angle of ransomware of insider threats, those sort of things. I mean, there's a lot of people that may have access to that data. That's why there's so many regulations around this stuff. That's why there's so much that's, laws protecting people, because there's a lot of people that can see that data. That's why there's all those restrictions. And just like all those regulations about sharing and releasing customer information exist, they exist because so many people have access, and all of those people are a risk point for ransomware.
Right. And, to your point, I don't think we've really considered, until it happens to you, the threat and the long-term impact, even the short-term impact of ransomware. I don't want to bring the mood down, but this is the first year we saw an actual death happen in a hospital because it was completely locked down, unable to access records for ransomware, which is just incredibly tragic that this happened. But, to the point of cyber acumen and cybersecurity as a whole, if you're not training your staff, just like you said, if you're not taking those steps to create the awareness to sort of bring the robustness to the technicality of the data center, you're putting not only yourself, your staff, but also your patients at risk.
Yeah, that's a big reason why we're so concerned about the medical vertical, because it's one thing if like the point of sale system goes down and I can't buy my Cheetos, right? That's inconvenient, right? I can't get gas. Ultimately, that's inconvenient, right? But if somebody is in the middle of a medical procedure and the system they need, right? I mean, think about some of these systems that work are complex robotic, surgery systems, right? What if that system is unavailable in the middle of surgery? What if something like that happens? What if there's treatment somebody has to get immediately and they can't get it, or the information about, their allergies or whatever suddenly goes offline? It puts you into the dark ages, right? And this actually is this can cost people's health, can cost people their lives. And so it's very, very critical and very important in this space in particular.
Yeah. So as far as, we know training can help. We know that creating the awareness can help. But what first steps should any healthcare organization take as they begin to take inventory and think about, well, this could happen to me. Like, what would you say the first step they should take is as far as preparing for it?
I mean, the first, there's not really a single first step. There's a lot of first steps. And that is because the answer to these situations is to have a strong defense in depth, right? There's never one thing you do, like never think there's one thing, right? If you do one thing, that's good, but you need to be thinking about the 5 things you're going to do, right? And so this idea that I need to control authentication authorization, right? This is some of the things we focused in our solutions, right? Around this pillars, there's 3 pillars: protect, detect, and recover. And I like to talk about this a lot, right? So I have data, right? I have information. I have to protect access to that. I have to protect the data. I have to protect the integrity of that data, right? And that's where we do things what we do, multi-factor authentication, zero trust infrastructure. We build, for our solution, right? We build backup appliances, right? These backup appliances are near impenetrable, right? They're designed to be very secure. They're designed to be a safe place for you to put your data. And when you put your data in them, we can even make them immutable, so that even if your backup admin decides he wants to mess you up, right, that backup admin can't actually go back and delete those backups, right? And there's those levels of security. That's the protection layer, right? And we talk about detection. We're talking about things like anomaly detection, being able to detect, are your workloads, is the data you're protecting get impacted by ransomware, those sort of things, right? Because you kind of assume like there's a first step, right? But you're going to assume you're going to get impacted, right?
Right.
And so these ideas of being able to detect those things, and like in recovery thing is just the idea that if we have to recover, you have to have that whole strategy. So like I said, you can't just come in and say, I got to make sure we're well protected, right? No, you need to make sure that you're well protected, that you're going to be able to check it, even though when your protection fails, you assume it's going to fail. How are we going to catch it soon? And then if all that happens, how do I get back to good, right? How do I get back to my last known copies? How do I get back to up and running? And how do I do it as fast as possible? And that's really what our focus is on, is not only that defense in depth, that idea that, hey, maybe nothing ever happens because we fend it off, right? But if it does happen, we're going to pick it up right away. And if it does happen, we're going to recover really fast after that.
I love your approach, John, because I think we've said this on every episode of VeritasLIVE, whether it's been ransomware focused or not. It's not a matter of if, but when. And you have to have that full, protect, detect, recovery plan in play. And the thing I'd add is you need to test it now, right? Like if you have it set up, but you never run through as if something happened, if you don't have the full assurance that if you are impacted, if you go down, you got to find those spots where you might have missed something. Make sure you go through it with a fine-tooth comb and ensure that not just protection, detection, or recovery are ensured for your important things, but the things that you might not find important as well, because you never know where they might get that PII or the data that can impact you as a business or as a healthcare association.
And that's really important, because I mean, it's that having that run book, having that resilience plan in place. And like you said, is testing it, right? And you want to test it, and you want to test it before the regulators show up and ask you to test it too, right?
Right.
You want to be a solution that builds where when the regulators show up and say test it, you don't have to go find 15 pieces of paper and a bunch of other stuff, right? I'm like, yeah, I know. Okay, this is the department I'm worried about. I can click on that department. I can say, let's do a dry run. Those sort of things. I mean, that gives you so much peace of mind, right? So that you can see everything. You have active detection. You have the ability to dry run these things. That is really what is designed to give you that peace of mind. And it's all around that whole kind of idea, like I said earlier, the kind of defense in depth, the multi-layered approach. And it's really the idea that there is no one solution that's going to make you more secure in these cases. It's going to be a collection of a bunch of services or strategies put together.
Now, I know we've talked a lot about this offline specifically, and you're an expert in all things cloud, but I'm wondering, how does cloud fit into this equation of healthcare, ransomware, and the digital transformation factor?
Well, cloud is really useful in this concept. Just in general, like cloud is a really interesting concept, it's still just computers, right? But there's a positioning and there's an optimization going on, right? So many companies have to deal with the idea that I acquire hardware, it's got to be good for 5 years. It's probably, outdated after a year, but then we just got to deal with it, right? And so having your infrastructure in the cloud allows you to have a more nimble architecture, a more nimble design. The idea that you can come in there and, I can implement these things. I can use these services that are much more on demand. So honestly, it helps keep costs down, right? If you build systems that are only, generating cost for the things you're doing instead of sitting around for 5 years collecting dust and generating money or taking money. Those are, getting away from those things helps lower costs, lowers costs for providing services to patients and stuff like that. But also from like the resiliency perspective, you create this kind of more portable reality, right? This idea that you can carve off a section in your cloud. I can work in there, but I can have secondary regions. I can go across cloud providers. I can go back on-prem to the cloud. All this stuff expands the capabilities, and it changes where you have to leverage services. And so this is really where it gets you into the more usable state, more functional data, right? And then from a data protection perspective, even if you don't want to go run a bunch of stuff in the cloud, like you don't want to have your activities in the cloud, having your infrastructure in your data center is great, right? Until that data center fails. So the fact that we can, take things and we can do optimized copy, we can dedupe it, we can store it in these object storage, we can make it immutable there, and then turn around and reuse that data in the cloud if you need to. Like you could do drive recovery in the cloud. You could take something and you could expose it for an analytics systems you want to use in the cloud. Those are all options you have. And being done in that idea that it's secure, it's immutable, it's protected. Those are all great opportunities that you can do with the cloud.
You're going to get a lot of efficiency is what I'm feeling from this. And this takes us right into the last question I had. And this is a scary one, because just how you can gain the efficiency, you can gain the quicker access to resources, infrastructures you need it in the cloud. According to Microsoft, ransomware kits are available for as little as $66 upfront, with a promise of a 30% profit share on the back end. So you can buy 1,000 stolen usernames and password pairs for as little as 97 cents, which is just buck wild. Or you could buy 400 million in bulk for $150. So like we are approaching this just critical mass of ransomware as a service is just available to anybody out there. A teenager can go buy some ransomware and put it into play if they're a little bit tech savvy. So with cloud as easy as it is to start adopting, and with ransomware as a service just sort of blowing up, like what additional assurances can we bring to our customers and healthcare institutions out there who need to prepare for this just ongoing and growing threat?
You're definitely right. I mean, that's a big problem. And it's like you're saying you can buy them. I mean, I'm sure with the right amount of Googling, you probably find a nice list of passwords for places. So that is definitely why having the multi-factor authentication, having all that in place, right? But, I could see somebody saying, well, if I copy my data into the cloud, right? What about there, right? So the immutability, right, helps you from the ransomware perspective, right? Nobody's going to be able to encrypt immutable data. So that protects you from that perspective. On-prem or wherever, that is the number one thing is if you can make all your copies immutable, no one's going to come in and encrypt your backups, right? They won't even be able to delete them. They'll be protected. But then there's this whole aspect of the data exfiltration, which in the medical vertical is really a big concern too, right? I don't want, everyone stealing my medical data, and I'm sure you don't want either, right? But the idea is that exfiltration is a big deal. So even in the cloud, somebody could say, let's say I'm an angry admin and I've got the credentials, right? So I want to make $500,000. Someone's going to pay me for them, right? That is a thing that could happen, right? Well, that's great, but even in that case, if somebody can come in and get into your object storage and start pulling that data out, what our stance on that is that we do source side encryption with particular managed keys and a multi-level key structure, in the sense that you can come in and the data, when it leaves whatever that source is, will be encrypted at that level. So we will encrypt it, we'll dedupe it, we'll compress it, we'll put it in that object storage. And so even if somebody were able to pull all your data out there in bulk, right? Which, because it shouldn't happen because you've got the multi-layer security on that level. But if in worst case scenario, you get a bad actor or something like that, somebody can pull that data out, right? They expose it to somebody else so they can get it. It's still all going to be encrypted. It's going to be in a format they can't use. So, you got the immutable copy, so they're not stopping you from using your data, and then you have the encryption layers and stuff like that, and the actually the deduplication, the compression, all that on top of that, right? Basically makes it way too much work. So that when you talk about some teenager who wants to steal somebody's medical data, they're not going to be able to circumvent that, right? And that really protects the data. It makes it basically essentially garbage to anyone but you. Right. It
kind of feels like that turn your key, sir moment from War Games. You're putting in the extra steps to not allow them to get access to that data, which is critical. We actually had a question come in from our audience. I'm curious what your take on this is, John. So what is unique to ransomware in healthcare over other industries? This comes from Tyler.
So One of the unique things about ransomware, I guess for healthcare, I mean, it's a couple different things. One of them is, the data is so sensitive, right? Not only from an actionable perspective, that if I can't get to the data because it's been encrypted, like we talked about earlier, right? There's a huge medical risk there, right? There's that idea that doctors need that information to tell you what's wrong with you or to treat you, right? They need that information. The other aspect is, somebody could get that information exfiltrated, right? So if somebody else gets a hold of that data, now you have this whole market where somebody's stolen famous people's data, right? Or politicians, medical information, right? And medical history. What can they do with that? Can people be bribed? Can people be coerced, right? Those are a lot of risks there. And I think that's why I think in the medical system, it's really unique. Because back in the day, I mean, not back in the day, but the first thing everyone worried about is someone going to steal my money, right? Yep. Is someone going to go to the bank and empty my bank account? And yeah, that happens. But honestly, in these days, the risk is there's a lot of mitigation in there. Like the bank can just be like, "No, what? Yeah, that didn't happen. We took the money back," right? Your credit card company could be like, "Yep, that's okay. We'll take care of getting those charges removed," right? I've had that happen where mysterious charges show up on my credit card, right? And I call them in, and they fix it, right? No big deal, right? Same sort of thing. So if somebody's getting into your data, if they get and ransomware is more than just encrypting data, which everyone does. They're trying to exfiltrate your data and leverage it for something else. Medical data is a huge risk there, and that's why we have the HIPAA things and stuff like that. But that would be my biggest concern, is that you could do a lot of damage, not just at the time or with what the data is getting used for normally, but you could do a lot of damage to the individuals that data represents.
It's a very good point. It's just a large target. It's my takeaway. You set it out so well. Is if you're in the healthcare organization, you need to treat yourself and consider yourself just one of the largest acting targets out there because of how important and sensitive that data is. One last question comes from Dan in our audience. How does zero trust fit into this conversation?
So zero trust, I mentioned that earlier, and there's a lot of different ways to talk about it, but the simplistic way I like to put it, right, is essentially what it says. It's trust no one, trust nothing, right? Like, even if I have the password, don't trust me, right? Make me validate through a third party, right? Through a second, make me go into a different system, authenticate with them also, and then approve my authentication. So, I mean, think about that idea. You said earlier, like, it's like a two keys thing, right? I can turn a key, but that guy's going to look at me and say, well, you're not John. I'm not turning my key, right? It's that idea. And there's more layers to that. Like if I have an application, right, that's running on a system, don't assume that application is acting in good faith, right? So there are things like you have to have certificates. I have to be able to validate that this is the right version of that application. There's all sorts of layers in that. It's essentially, like I said, is don't trust anyone, verify everything, and have that. And it's relatively a practical thing to implement, and it's something that applies to everybody on every level, like from a government system to your home systems, right? I mean, if you're at home and you've got your phone, and if you log into your phone's account, it doesn't have a pop-up that says someone just logged into your phone, make sure that was you. If you're not doing that stuff, you should be, because it applies to every level.
Every time I host one of these, I always leave the episode feeling a little more nervous than I was when I started. So thank you, as always, John, for keeping up the trend and tradition of making me nervous. And you brought sage advice. So, I would say for everyone in the healthcare industry and just everyone in any industry writ large, consider what John brought to the table today. It's good for not just one vertical, but all of them. And thank you for joining us on the episode today. Even though it was you and I think the conversation was great. And I want to ask our audience, thank you for participating, and we hope to see you on the next episode of Veritas Live when it happens. So once again, I'm Anthony Cusimano, your host, and I hope you have a good one. Stay safe out there, because the ransomware is real.